All right, what's up? I'm here. How's everyone doing today? I'm doing pretty fucking great, to be honest. Not for any particular reason. Oh, just in a good mood. I had a big lunch. I usually don't eat during the day, which is good for getting shit done, but makes you a little anxious and nervous, a little on edge. I'm always a little on edge because I drink coffee throughout the day, but I don't eat, and yeah, it just makes my nervous system a little irritable sometimes. But when I eat a big ass meal during the day, I'm usually pretty unproductive, but I'm happier. So here I am. Tonight we're going to be talking with Michael James. By the way, if any of you sorry souls are here already just to see Michael James, please spare yourself and go do something more satisfying for the next 20 minutes or so, because this is when I kind of just talk about whatever I want, and it's not for everyone probably. So yeah, Michael will be joining me in about 20 minutes, as is the custom here on this weird little TV show thing I have here. And in the meantime, I just rant. So thank you for joining me, everyone. I'm always surprised and impressed and grateful to see the small handful of you that always return. What should I talk about today? Well, I have a few bullet points, a few random things. One thing that I was just thinking about before the stream is I'm curious, like, where is the next Twitter going to be? Where is the next Facebook going to be? I know that have been for a while some kind of alternative startups, open source kind of alternatives and stuff like that people, and some kind of, I know there are also some decentralized social media platforms on the blockchain even. I know there are some Ethereum ones, but they're all, early days, and it's not clear to me what exactly is going to happen next. But it definitely seems to me that the big ones are in a state of terminal decay. It seems to me that Twitter and Facebook are like on their last dying breaths. Who knows? Dying institutions can carry on for quite a long time. So I'm not making any concrete predictions, but my sense is that we're probably approaching a point soon where there will be some tipping point and some kind of superior alternative arises. And I'm just curious, I don't really pay too much attention. What are where are people going to go? Like, if everyone starts getting kicked off Twitter, for instance, surely at least the people getting kicked off are going to find some other place to go. I'm just curious, where is it? Do any of you know where it's going to be next? Is it Mastodon? Is Mastodon cool? I've never really messed with it. Is it going to be on the blockchain? Is it some other thing I don't know about? You gotta keep me posted so I know where to go in case I get kicked off. But I was also thinking about this in connection to some of the recent affairs, the recent scandal du jour of the Sarah Zhang case, and then also the Alex Jones case. I actually kind of find it interesting to think about the Sarah Zhang incident right next to or juxtaposed to the Alex Jones incident, because I think that they're two sides of the same coin. In some sense, mainstream media platforms, which is a large category within which we can kind of lump in, the New York Times as well as Twitter and, YouTube, basically just established large established commercially dominant media and communication platforms. They seem to be stuck in kind of commercially driven but ultimately short-sighted dynamics in which they are actively kind of pushing themselves into a corner. And I think the case of Sarah Zhang is a really, really clear example of the fact that the cathedral cannot self-correct. It's not going to self-correct. It's going to become more and more kind of insular and detached from reality, I think, for the foreseeable future. and you see this, you know this because there have been some high profile cases where not just people like Sarah Zhang, like increasingly kind of stupid and crazy people are being hired, and that whole kind of model is being doubled down on by, you know, places like the New York Times. But you also see it in negative instances where possible course corrections are not made. So for instance, I compare the Sarah Zhang case to the Kevin Williams case, or what is his name? Kevin Williamson, the conservative columnist who the Atlantic, you know, generally left-leaning kind of progressive cathedral institution, considered hiring Kevin Williamson and they actually had decided to hire him, even though he's quite conservative. This is sort of after Trump was elected. And I interpreted, when I first heard that the Atlantic was going to hire Kevin Williamson, I was like, oh, okay, interesting. So this looks like maybe, you know, the lefty cathedral institutions can course correct after the Trump fiasco, understand how they've actually generated a phenomenon such as Trump, and they actually can creatively engineer a different kind of cultural trend to stop kind of promoting precisely what they generally dislike, like someone like Trump. Obviously, the way to do that would be to hire smart, intelligent conservatives and to open up the right wing of what's acceptable in these media platforms. That's a change that is within their reach. They absolutely could do it. And I think the logic of why to do it is very obvious. I mean, there's a massive market for more conservative views that, you know, the New York Times is not really able to currently fulfill. That's why you have places like Breitbart or whatever. And so when I noticed that when Kevin Williamson was almost hired at the Atlantic, I was like, okay, maybe there's a possibility that the cathedral can course correct. Yeah, I'm not saying Kevin Williamson is like some great, awesome guy or anything. I'm just saying he's a relatively smart, relatively intelligent, conservative voice. And the Atlantic was thinking about kind of opening up to that a little bit more. And basically they ended up not hiring him, in large part because of his views on abortion, and some of his writings on abortion were kind of unacceptable to kind of the outrage thermometers of, you know, the base, I guess you could call it, of the Atlantic audience or whatever. So ultimately they decided not to hire him because of because the left base of the Atlantic didn't want it. And so that was like, okay, that was when I was like, well, it looks like the kind of death spiral that like the right and the left are locked into, where kind of like the identity politics left is basically kind of in this kind of subtle hidden unison with, you know, people like Trump. Like they're essentially, you know, it's a symbiotic, it's one symbiotic organism. That seemed to be confirmation that, okay, it looks like they're actually not able to course correct because of the political calculus that they're more or less stuck in. The Sarah Zhang case is just another really, really strong example that the left institutions, especially, you know, mainstream left institutions, are locked in a kind of dynamic of they're basically in the kind of like arms race of stupidity. They need to kind of like actively increase you know, the stupidity signaling to satisfy the tastes of their main audience, I suppose, even if opening up to like a large swath of people on the other side has some, you know, like commercial attraction to it. They're not able to do that. And so that seems to, so anyway, I'm kind of just riffing, but the reason I started going off on this point is because that's one sub point here. It looks to me like these different data points look to me like the cathedral media institutions are locked into a dynamic in which they're going to be doubling down on kind of just increasingly transparently kind of stupid, low quality thinkers and content to please their base. It looks like they can't get out of that even if they try. Meanwhile, people like Alex Jones, who are kind of like, you know, off in outer space with their own kind of like totally independent and just kind of almost off the political radar map. You know, obviously Alex Jones has his politics that can be somewhat mapped onto the major ideological coordinates, but he's also just crazy and kind of in outer space in some sense. Those sort of like highly idiosyncratic, but also, you know, like him or hate him, you know, very independent and passionate, you know, serious independent types of alternative reality construction projects, such as Alex Jones. Those are at the same time going to be, it looks like probably they're going to be more and more clamped down on, excluded, shut out, and maybe even like legally suppressed in some sense. And so when you take those two things together, not just like the scandal du jour, but the larger trend of where it looks like the wind is blowing right now, it seems to me that, you know, the larger number of just smart people who are increasingly hungry and thirsty for just genuine exchange, genuine intellectual search, genuine communication, and kind of like radically incisive, honest stimulation and debate, like that. I guess that's a niche audience. Obviously, most people don't want that, but the large numbers of people who do want that, I mean, I guess I would describe myself as that type of person, and I suspect many of you are that type of people. That group of people is going to find all of the mainstream media institutions increasingly stupid and just like unbearable. Like we're not, like, people aren't even going to be able to, like, smart, interesting people looking for genuine stimulation and exchange are not even going to be able to, look at the New York Times. Like, it's not even going to be seen at, people are going to be bored of even criticizing it. They're just going to increasingly kind of see it as a rag that doesn't even deserve attention to be criticized or looked at or engaged with. And those are, and probably what most of us consider like pretty reasonable, kind of honest but open, slightly provocative, but totally reasonable and fairly sane ideas in debate will increasingly get defined as Alex Jones level, or it'll be classified as Alex Jones kind of dangerous, fake news, whatever, irresponsible, libel, whatever. Like, I suspect that, yeah, the bar for what counts as like Alex Jones level crazy that deserves to be suppressed and shut out, the bar for that is going to lower and lower until it actually starts to characterize like many of us, even like in this room or whatever. So that those two things, when you take them together, it seems to me to be like a pretty clear dynamic in which there's going to be a very large constituency of people, or a sufficiently large constituency of people, I should say, that is more than enough for that critical mass required for some sort of new, like radically decentralized, censorship-free, ideally censorship-proof kind of social media platform. And whether that's going to be like something like Mastodon or some other platform we don't even know about right now, or maybe it will even be on the blockchain. I don't know if like the blockchain technology is going to be accessible enough soon enough for blockchain to kind of anytime soon fill that gap. But I think it's an exciting possibility. It could be, but I'm sure there are lots of ways of, imagining more decentralized, censorship-free, radically open social media platforms that could emerge soon, maybe, who knows, without necessarily requiring the blockchain. But the blockchain could be, a really exciting and significant, powerful way to make that turning point all the more exciting and radical and locked in. So that was just a bit of that was a set of reflections I was kind of having as I was kind of watching this like Sarah Zhang incident unfold and the Alex Jones stuff unfold. Yeah, because another thing is like, Alex Jones' audience is increasing, right? Because of this type of fiasco. And I would wager, I mean, I don't know any data on this, I haven't seen it, but I would wager that every time that there's this kind of Sarah Zhang moment that the New York Times and these mainstream institutions have, it's probably going to chip away at their audience. I would imagine. That's just a guess. I don't know the data on that. It will satisfy like the frenzied base of the frenzied vocal base, but it will probably decrease their net social influence at the same time that someone like Alex Jones' social influence on net is going to be increasing. So yeah, I mean, do the math of where that leads. All right. What else? What else is on the agenda? I'll send a link to Michael James in 10 minutes. I was actually reading Michael James' stuff today. I wasn't that busy, so I spent some very nice time reading, in particular, one of his last blog posts about communist patchwork. I think Michael and I will have a lot to very naturally talk about. It seems like he and I probably see eye to eye on a lot of things, so I think that'll be interesting. Looking forward to talking with him. I got a blog post in the queue. It's almost done. I'll post it very soon. It's pretty good, I think. I think it's pretty fun. I've been reading David Graeber's book on bureaucracy. What's it called? I always forget the titles of. I read a lot now on like digital formats, like e-readers and stuff. So I don't actually see the title that much. Utopia of Rules. That's what it's called. Yeah. It's good. It's fun. I like David Graeber. He's still one of my kind of favorite leftist writers. But one of the ideas in the book that I kind of took issue with and was kind of inspired to jot some things down about it is that he kind of pushes this narrative in which, in his view, one of the reasons that we have so many bureaucratic regulations today and why so many people's jobs in the Western world is just like filled with, doing tasks that mostly don't really matter and have no real effect, just pushing different types of paper for arbitrary reasons. Utopia of Rules, that's what it's called. And he basically makes the suggestion that it's because the ruling class is kind of terrified about robots and AI making the working class free from drudgery. So it's this sort of narrative in which the threat of AI is to liberate the working class from, having to work, and this threatens the ruling class. And so there's he tells a kind of capitalist kind of class war recuperation narrative in which the people that are pushing all of this bureaucracy are basically trying to just keep the masses busy, because if the masses aren't busy, if AI, spares them of drudgery and gives them a lot of free time, then that leads to, resistance and rebellion, and it will give them the free time to overthrow capitalism and all that. That's kind of one of his big ideas. I would say that's one of the general gists of his perspective that you get in that book. And it's interesting, and he's very smart, and he makes the case quite interestingly and fairly compellingly, I think. But this blog post that I'm writing, that I'm going to release like in a day or two, is basically, I agree with him in a lot of ways. I think like he's telling an empirical story that makes some sense. But what's tricky about it is that the difference between the ruling class and the working class nowadays, like with the recently accelerated economic inequality since the 80s, like income inequality has been so vertiginous. It's increased so dramatically and exponentially, and with this kind of accelerating structure, that it really skews our sense of like who's who in the income distributions. I think a lot of people don't really understand this. So like when most people think about like the 99% versus the 1%, when people think about like who's really in the elite rich group, call it the 1%, call it like the 0.01%, people's intuitive models of like who exactly is in these baskets of income deciles or percentiles it's very confusing. Like I think most of us have in our minds a picture of the income distribution that's not really accurate. And one of the reasons that I think this is because of my own personal experience. Actually, I only recently I came across some of the data on who's who in the income distribution, like what salary amount is equal to what percentile in the income distribution, both in the US and in the UK. I was kind of looking at it separately, and it's not at all what I thought it was. So for instance, Finargle, you're asking me, am I in the 1%? No, I'm not in the 1%, but it's very interesting because I'm actually, in some ways, I'm poorer than I thought, and in other ways, I'm richer than I thought. In other words, and this is what I spell out in detail in the post. If you find this at all interesting or want to know more about it, you can just read the blog post. It's actually a good chunk of the blog post is kind of just like a personal story about how I what I thought was the case, even just as recently as like a year ago. And what actually turns out to be the case when you look at the data, I was really stunned. Like my model of the world was really wrong. And I'm pretty educated. I mean, I'm like a social scientist. I'm 31. I'm like, I guess I'm a pretty stupid social scientist. But my point is that if I had this like significant error, other people probably do too. And basically, what it was is that, like, how do I put this? Like my wife and I, like we're fine, we're good. We're not like we can't complain about anything. We're grateful for everything we have. But we like have a small flat. We like don't do very fancy things very often. We like save a little bit, which is itself a privilege for sure. But like we can't in any way like afford like super, fancy things. Like there are lots of things that like put it this way, like we don't do a lot of the things that most people would think of when you think of like rich people. That's all I'm really getting at. Like we're fine and we're grateful, but we're not like, we don't have any of the outward markers or like material luxuries that most people have in their minds when they think about like rich people. And then I looked at the income distributions and I'm like the lowest level possible, basically at like a tenured academic level. And my salary is the 77th percentile of the income distribution. And when I saw that, I was like, holy shit. I would have guessed before I looked at the data, I would have guessed I was like a little bit above average. Like that was what I had in my head. I'm probably like, I'm well off. I'm grateful for what I have, but I'm not a rich person at all. Like I'm probably a little bit above average. I probably would have guessed if I had to, I would have guessed like a 55th percentile or something like that. Like middle class, like a little bit above average is what I feel like subjectively, what I thought I was. Yeah, my income is actually 77th percentile. And when I saw that, I was like, wow. So like, I'm actually much closer to the economic elite or like the 1% or whatever than I thought. And then then I went down this rabbit hole. I was like, I started looking up making all these comparisons. And because I got this idea, I was thinking about this because of David Graeber's book. I was like, David Graeber invented this idea of like the 1% as a political slogan, and it was just an Occupy around 2011. He was the one who coined this, now famous distinction between the 99% and the 1% as a kind of political distinction for propagandistic purposes. And quite brilliantly so. I mean, it worked really well and kind of coagulated a lot of political energy. But then I was like, I never would have thought this at the time because my model was wrong of like how the distribution looks. I was like, David Graeber's a full professor at London School of Economics. Like he could be in the 1%. And then I did I did some back of the envelope calculations, and I found that. And by the way, I'm not sniping at David Graeber. I admire him. I hope to. He's in the UK. I would hope very much one day to get to meet him. I like his work. So I'm not making low blows at him. But out of curiosity, I couldn't help but wonder. I looked up like the average salary for a professor at the London School of Economics for full professor is about £86,000 a year. And then I cross-referenced that to the income deciles data from the government. And that is the 96th percentile of income. So that's damn close to being in the 1%. If David Graeber is a little bit above average, and he might be, I mean, he has a very high profile. He could very well have negotiated up above the average. I mean, I have no idea what he makes, but basically what I'm getting at is there is a chance, I don't know the details, but there is a chance that David Graeber is literally in the 1% of the income distribution, at least. And when I realized that, I was like, wow, that would be really salacious thing to learn, that the person who kind of like mobilized this idea of the 99% as a kind of anti-capitalist, like anti-rich political slogan could very well have launched that from the 1% of the income distribution. I don't know if it's true. Maybe someone can ask him. I'm not sniping at him, but I just thought that was fascinating. So yeah. So basically I have this blog post coming up that is basically all about how the income distribution is not what most people think it is, and how it's really confusing, and how one of the implications is that today the working class, like the ruling class, actually looks a lot like the working class. And a lot of the ruling class, even they like objectively, they do work really hard just to kind of sustain like what most people have in their minds as like basic middle class comforts from like, the 1950s or whatever, like the lifestyle that a unionized, steelworker in America could have in the 1950s is a kind of quality of life that there are people in today's ruling class, like in the upper ends of the economic income distribution, like, my level, really, like it's 75 percentile or whatever, quite close to the top, who are basically working super hard. Like they're basically workers, who don't even yet have like that picture of like middle class security and comfort that unionized steelworkers had in the 1950s. So in a weird way, like there is a ruling class, there is obviously like inequality, and some people have way more than others. But that it's very different than what people think. Like a lot of those people who are at the top are themselves like working really hard. They're also kind of working class. It's very strange. So yeah, I wrote a long thing that's trying to kind of like work through this and explain this. But I'm now a little over time, and I need to end my rant and bring in Michael James. So all I have to do is send him the link real quick. Michael James, if you're listening, hang tight. Just 1 second. Anyone in the chat, if you have questions or comments you want me to ask Michael James, start thinking about that now, and type in the chat, and I'll be sure to get that on the agenda. Let's do this. While I'm emailing Michael James the link, for those of you who might be joining for the first time, perhaps to see Michael, I want to just briefly remind you to, if you would, please, or if you wish to, I should say, I don't really care, but if you'd wish to, please go ahead and subscribe now before you forget. I'm actually really close to the special 1,000 threshold, so it'd be sweet if I could get to that. Hangouts, there we go. Michael, sorry, he needs me to email him, so. And also, I'll give my my one reminder per session in saying that if you are interested in joining the Discord server, just shoot me a DM or email me, and I'll hook you up with that. All right, so Michael, if you're listening, I just sent you an email with a link to the Hangout. So now we will just wait for Michael James to join us. Moldbugian class analysis explains the world way better than 19th century Marxist class analysis. Okay. All right, here we go. Michael, you're with us. Can you hear me okay? I think your mic might be off. There you go. Now.
There we go.
There we go. Are you doxing yourself or no?
I was thinking about it, but I get distracted looking at myself.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Not a big fan of watching my weird gestures and whatnot. So.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I think that's actually a good reason to do. I think a lot of people just want to like protect their anonymity, but actually a good independent reason is just that it's less distracting. It's easier to like think when you're not worrying about like how you look. You can just focus on like thoughts and the words. So I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. I'm very happy to be chatting with you. Thank you for entertaining my weird request to join this like strange television show thing that I do.
Oh, no, that's cool. I've been following along, so I've really enjoyed the people you've already talked to.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah, I've seen you in the chat before. Thanks for your interest and thanks for participating. So I was actually reading your blog post today, your most recent blog post about communist patchwork, and I figured, since it's fresh in my mind, that's a good place to jump off if you don't mind.
Yeah, we can jump right into it. Just a word of caution, though, because it's a little bit of a rough draft. So whoever's reading it, just give a little leeway on the rough draft. So.
Sure. Yeah, of course. No worries. I mean, it's a blog post. That's that's blog culture, right? Yeah, I think you and I will quickly find that we're definitely kind of thinking along similar tracks. I think so. I think that will be interesting, and will make the conversation quite easy, I suspect. But actually, maybe before we do that, I don't know that much about you. I don't know how anonymous you are. I mean, you use your name, it seems. So, if you want to like decline any of these questions, you can be as cagey as you want to be. But could you tell me a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. 40-ish white male. Let's start with that. I've been having a lot of conversations this week about privilege, so that's top in my mind. My background's anthropology. I have a master's in anthropology, but I've been working in social services and public health my whole life.
Okay. Are you in what country are you in?
I'm in Canada, Alberta.
Okay, cool. So you've been working in like social services, you said, health services?
Yeah, health services, public health, since I was 20. Actually, I like to brag that I haven't worked for a for-profit organization since I was 19. So
nice. Okay, cool. And are you kind of very embedded in kind of left-wing activist circles, would you say, or no?
Not so much anymore. I was when I was younger. I mean, the extent of my participation in kind of radical circles would have been Black Bloc, 2002 in G8 Kananaskis. I was in Alberta, so participated a little bit there. I've done a little bit of organizing and things like that. Became really, really dissatisfied with that whole sphere, probably in my early 30s, and then just focused more on my professional work and intellectual interests.
Okay, well that makes sense. I'm in my early 30s, and I guess I'm currently going through a profound disillusionment as well. So another thing we have in common, I guess.
Yeah, well, let's fix that with getting an appropriate patchwork in place.
Excellent. Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, one thing I immediately resonated with me from your piece is, the impression I get is you remain very interested in possibilities for, radical social change, and in a direction that, it sounds like a lot of people would associate with a kind of left-wing flavor. It sounds like you're interested in, more egalitarian community life and healthier, happier community life for a larger number of people. This sort of agenda seems to be something that you're interested in, roughly, without knowing you too well. I'm just saying the impression that I got. But you're also kind of trying to work through this confrontation with accelerationism, and patchwork kind of now, at least for the moment, still has a little bit of a right-wing flavor to it, because it's associated with Moldbug and Nick Land. So that's the vibe that I got from your blog post, and that's very much kind of my own intellectual complex at the moment. So maybe so that I just wanted to kind of flag that I wanted to give you my kind of impressionistic takeaway from it, and you can correct me on if I'm wrong on any of that. But could you maybe in your own words, do you want to tell the listeners about how you saw that, what you were trying to say, or what you're trying to get at in that piece, what you're trying to do there?
Like a synopsis of sorts?
Or, go off in any direction you want. But if you want to comment on anything I said, you can. But maybe you just tell. Yeah, good.
I think most people who, would listen to me talk about politics and these kinds of things about, using a radical municipality approach to politics and things like that, they would definitely get the sense that I'm leftist, and my values kind of orbit in that direction too. I like to think that I'm one of those people that kind of is trying to reject that whole spectrum. And I mean, not that we can overly reject it, because it's at work in our culture, right? And that's a lot of things are hinged on that. But for me, it's not. I'm trying to get away from allowing myself to be attracted to those kinds of ideas, and I'm trying to kind of do something a little more deflating, in the sense of getting rid of these big grand ideas that have been kind of bandied around for many, many years, and kind of started the basics. And I guess for me, that's where the kind of approach coming from municipalities comes from, and the local. And that's what I'm doing with this first post, is kind of trying to get my head around what it means to take a local approach to, radical social change in politics and things like that. And for me, of course, the best place to start is, in the basics: water, food, shelter. What are humans actually doing? Like I said, I have a background in anthropology, so I've always been more interested in kind of on what's happening on the ground and what people are actually doing, as opposed to these grand ideas that we can argue about on Twitter for 45 days or whatnot. So that's kind of my approach, is just trying to start with this idea and use some of these tools that I've come across, like that I've come across in my work, my professional work, and then also intellectually, like, accelerationism and questions about that. And just, yeah, and kind of mash them together and start from the ground up, and with the long view of trying to find out how to adapt to the various crises that are going on, and what I see is probably the opposite of accelerationism, but total collapse in the very near future. So.
Right. I mean, I took from your post that you're kind of saying, like, this idea of building communism from the ground up in local communes, it's far from exhausted. Like, a lot of people are acting like and talking like that's been tried before and it's impossible and it never works and it needs to be kind of totally abandoned. And you're kind of saying, like, whoa, wait, I don't think that's right. And you're still interested in that. And I'm also still interested in that too. I also, like, I concur that I think the verdict is not out yet on that tradition. And I'm inclined to think, and this is something I kind of wanted to put on the table after reading your piece, is that I'm inclined to think that one reason why that's a much liver wire than people think it is because so much has changed, even in the past decade or 2 decades for sure, since most of the most high profile kind of, small scale communistic experiments were tried, like in the 70s or 80s or whatever. Like, most of the experiments to building like local communism that people have in their mind as exemplary failures come from a radically different, social and technological plane. And my sense is just that we have a lot more at our disposal now to play around with for creating like optimal communistic patches that just haven't been, it really hasn't been tried in the current social technological plane yet. And I think there's many reasons to be quite hopeful that something really profound and new could be engineered that would be a kind of functioning local communism. So I've been thinking about that for a while. And yeah,
I think that's a great way to put it, that the possibilities aren't exhausted, right? It's, some of the failures, I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong and others people can chime in on this, but with these previous trials of communism and things like that, is that there are these huge, massive projects, right? And there's a huge ideological component where people are advocating for a particular type of approach, instead of, taking a step back and looking at how to build it from, house to house, neighborhood to neighborhood, community to community. And like you said, there's a whole array of new technologies and new approaches that, they don't fall under the umbrella of communism per se, but you know what, they're building communities and they're trying to build something that's communalistic, right? And so for, take Marx, take the big ideologies out of it, what are people doing out there that they're trying to improve their day-to-day lives and, address some of these big crises like climate change or whatever, like that, all the various crises that are happening, but they're doing it from a very personal and local perspective. And I think that's what interests me the most, is that, I talk to people in like a permaculture circle, right? And they don't talk about communism. They don't talk about seizing the means of production, but they're busy building new means and modes of production in their communities. Mm-hmm. Right. And this is what and why we're patchwork kind of, for me, as someone who's, grown up on Deleuze and DeLanda and these assemblage theorists, and even like Latour with network theory and the compositionalist perspectives, is that you can break it down to all the different elements. And for me, patchwork is the idea, that you can do something radically different if you just piece it all together properly. And that's where the interest comes from me. And I think that there's a lot of ways that people who aren't interested in these big ideas and communism per se, they're doing it on a daily basis. They're out there building networks and building local food circles and things like that can really be, all patched together, for lack of a better term, to radically, resist what's happening in globalization or these massive corporate takeovers of our cities and our districts, right?
Right. Yeah, for sure. I was actually thinking, reading your post, about one of the more concrete reasons for why I think building the communist patch in a localistic way might work now better than it ever has in the past. And the way that I was summarizing it in my mind as I was thinking about it today is that it seems to me that there are increasing what we might call knowledge gaps, which is just kind of clunky way of describing a certain distance between knowledge that has been produced about how to optimally run some domain, whatever it might be, some domain of life, whether it's personal relationships or, how to have the best possible human relationship, how to educate a child in the best possible way, how to do, as another good example would be agriculture, right? Like how to actually have an optimal, patch of land in the most effective, efficient, sustainable way, whatever. Technology is an obvious instance where knowledge has ballooned rapidly over the past several years. And in all of these different domains, we have this significant increase in just knowledge about how to optimize these different systems, these different subsystems of life and of a community. But all of our institutions are massive and sclerotic and so slow to adapt that in all these domains, there's this kind of knowledge gap between what we could optimize and what we're able to optimize within our current lives, as they're kind of dominated by all these like massive sclerotic institutions. And it seems to me that gap has increased because knowledge has increased so rapidly with the internet. Because that knowledge gap has increased so much, like the bigger that gap becomes, the more probable it becomes that some kind of like creative community will be able to apply that knowledge in a way that so far surpasses like the productive output effects, the edge, in other words, like the productive edge that is gained by the agile application of that superior knowledge relative to what you're able to achieve or do in these sclerotic large institutions. That gap has become so large that I now think like the probability that a creative, intelligent group could basically design a community from scratch in like a radically more attractive way, that probability seems like quite high right now, and that probability seems to be increasing because knowledge about how to live and how to organize things is increasing, and our institutions are not at all keeping up.
Absolutely. I mean, I agree wholeheartedly with that. I see it in my day-to-day work too. Is part of my job in the organization I work with is to go out there and get that research, those leading edge research, and try and find a way to implement it with higher level and middle level managers. And in that field that I've been working in for a long time, we have been saying for years there's a good 15-year gap between the really good stuff that's going on in, say, like a really strong empirical sociological or sociology department, and what we're doing every day, right? That we're trying to implement some program somewhere in some school board or school district. But these academics have been talking about it 15, 20 years ago, right? But I think you're right. It's and this is again why Patrick's so exciting to me, is that if you get a bunch of like-minded people who are interested in creating these alternative communities, and you go through a roster of who's working on it and who's helping and making it happen, and the expertise that it takes to make these communities, you can basically circumvent all those institutions that are making this knowledge not necessarily accessible to everyone, but you can apply them in a local circumstance, right? So one of the things I'm trying to do in my personal life is my partner calls it building tribe, but what it's basically is doing is we are intentionally befriending and creating networks with people who have these capacities that can create a network or a community that's completely different in a lot of ways from what most of us just move into a neighborhood and we go to the grocery store or whatever the case may be. But if we create these communities that are alternative, that in itself is a kind of politics, right? That being said, as an aside though, is that I'm not necessarily even convinced that that's the kind of thing that we should be doing, is kind of leaving the city or flocking to these acreages outside of town or whatever and creating these communes. Like we know that's been tried, and we know how sustainable it is. And again, perhaps it'll be even more sustainable and more effective this time around. But I think, and this brings it back to my blog post, is I think the opportunity to work with municipalities and to get people with a certain expertise and certain abilities and capabilities to create new local spaces and local institutions. If we get them involved in city politics at the level of city council and mayors and those kind of things, and we see this over in Spain and places like Argentina and stuff too, where farmers are becoming councillors and they're running for mayor and things like that, and but not so much in North America, where you still see like the current mayor of my city, which is a very progressive city. He's businessman. His background is in business, and everyone on the council are businessmen, right? Or women. There are a few women, thank God. But I mean, those are the people that we should be having in place to make the decisions in how we run our city and the place that we live and the place that we exchange everything we do, right?
So this is actually something I wanted to ask you about. You do lean towards seeing this as a kind of urban model, like cities, metropolitan areas, you imagine, or no?
Yes and no. Like that's where my interest lies, because I'm trying to actually enact this in the real world, and I live in a capital city, right? So, but I think there's, and this is speaks to the particularism of this kind of thing, or how the specifics and the nuances of each individual region. We can get into this, but this is like my second post that's coming along in terms of design, using infrastructure and habitat and housing and zoning and those kinds of things in a way that's sustainable in a bioregion. So you asked me if it's an urban model. I'd say it's more of a bioregional model.
Okay.
So you're looking at like watersheds and catchments and stuff like that. And how are we going to sustain that population in that bioregion, right? So it's not detached from like the physical limitations of the area. So if we were to scale it down and say that, I want this radical municipal approach to resisting corporate control or even taking on the national level governments, is that, even a town can do it as long as they are, aware of what their decisions are doing in terms of the ecology of the region they're in and the effects it has on the people. It's all depends on what's going on in each individual area. It's not a cookie cutter kind of approach, because each patchwork has to be based on the population that are engaging in it and the resources that they have around it, right?
Right, sure. What's interesting? You mentioned how this is not so much happening in North America as it is in some other places. But what's interesting about North America is that to the degree this is kind of happening, the right wing is kind of at the forefront of it. Have you been following any of this stuff? Like there's a town in Utah, for instance, that like a bunch of conservative people from California, they were like, fuck this, California's too liberal. We're moving to this like little bodunk town in Utah and we're going to basically take over. And they're doing that. There are projects like that you see a little bit in the U.S. and they tend to be. They're much more likely right now to be right wing, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I have noticed that. Like a lot of people talk about the hippie communes or whatever, but those things are definitely happening. One thing that kind of shocked me into thinking really deeply about this too is Naomi Klein's disaster capitalism, and she talks about what happened after Hurricane Katrina. And these different state governments giving almost full control over infrastructure and what's typically seen as a municipal government area of governance to corporations. So prisons, water supplies, waste management, we're handing those over to corporations. And those are the things that matter the most to us. That's what structures our society from a very basic, level.
Right.
But I think there's a lot of people trying to exit and trying to we've had discussions with the people I'm working with too of taking over a small town. Like there was 40 of us to move into a small rural town in Alberta. We would basically be able to vote ourselves in as mayor, city council, and you name it. We own that city as of that.
Right. I'm really into that idea personally. Like, did you see that movie, Wild Wild Country?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. It's really crazy. It's about a cult leader from India, I think it was, if I recall correctly, and built this cult and basically moved to, I forget, I think it was Nevada, and they basically just brought in enough people, took over like the local government, and then they started developing like crazy. I mean, actually, if you're interested in small scale kind of like radical experiments, it's a really, really interesting case because I had never heard of it either. And I'm quite interested in kind of the history of like radical experimental communities and stuff. So I was very surprised that I never heard about it. It's on Netflix right now. And somehow I never heard about it, but it's, I think as far as I know, it's one of the biggest in terms of just the financial scale and the geographical scale. Like they moved into this city, they took it over, and they developed like entire neighborhoods, and it was like quite impressive, just the actual just the success of the engineering project. Like they really built it up, and they really took over against the resistance of a lot of locals who really tried to mobilize against them, and it lasted much longer than you would have thought, and it was like really quite fascinating story. I was curious if you knew about it.
No, but I'm definitely going to check it out.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. Right. So tell me more. I'm curious to learn more about like, what is your, tell me more about like your personal situation and your personal vision for, because you said you're very interested in basically trying to do this sort of thing. So tell me more about the details of that. Like, what does that look like for you? And in the near future, what are you aiming for?
Well, it's obviously in the system that we're in, we need the capital, right? We need the money to do certain things. Like you said, that whole developing a neighborhood, right?
Right.
If we were to go to, and the plan so far, I don't want to give it away because then we're warning the people that we're going to do this to, but is, to go to a small town and just have like 30 or 40 or 50 of us kind of take over key positions. So the people who are very close in my circle are, they're police officers, they're doctors. Myself, I work for, school boards, and I can do community development stuff. I basically work in any kind of, municipal bureaucratic setting, doing various things. And, just having key people, because it's an intentional thing, right? And it's networking and having key people. Like I have a permaculturist and family involved and those kinds of things. So it's, personally, we're looking at, going into a place and basically taking it over without the whole cult aspect, although the cult aspect might be fun. So
yeah,
do some kind of cult situation, but
right. Interesting. So yeah, you don't have to give me any, you don't have to divulge any secret details of it, but so how communist will it be?
Well, it's, to get a little more personal too, I mean, it's going to be really communistic because basically, the people I operate with, I'm polyamorous. And so we have a really interesting, a different social network. And, we're looking at doing things very like explicitly communistic, right? So, but that being said, we still have to negotiate having, day jobs, or if three of us want to be on city council, right? We're in a position we're gonna have power or something like that. But just day-to-day stuff, it's obviously going to be, completely democratic and whatnot.
Interesting. Okay.
How to run the compound, I guess, for lack of a better way to call it.
Well, it's fascinating. So, you're imagining like it will be a one large physical living space, but also kind of control, like local control of the community outside. So like you'll be in like a large space, commune with a bunch of people like actually living together. And you'll also occupy key positions in the city government, but there will also be other people in the city under the jurisdiction who are not necessarily like explicitly involved or know what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. Like all of us are pretty successful professionals. So, I mean, we have a certain amount of money that we could easily go in and buy in the current market, 30, 40, 50 acres just right outside of a town. And
nice.
Along with that, I mean, there's a bunch of us there, there's like a lawyer, there's a doctor, there's, like I said, there's teachers, those kind of things. And those are key positions within a town.
Yeah.
Right? So, I mean, yeah, that kind of thing. But I mean, that's my personal kind of way that I'm trying to lay it out. On a more abstract level with this blog post and stuff like that, that's going to look 1,000 different ways in 1,000 different locations, and whoever is involved, right?
Cool. Interesting. Very interesting. So where do you come down on questions of commerce? Because, you know, generally like the left tends to be skeptical of commerce, tends to locate a lot of the, you know, social evils of the world in commerce and, you know, productive exploitation. But a lot of the people that are more interested in things like patchwork tend to see commerce in a much more positive light and as a kind of critical ingredient of patchwork. So I'm curious, where do you come down on that?
Yeah, I mean, in the broadest sense, I'm anti-capitalist in a lot of ways. I find it's an insane system, and I mean that kind of a clinical sense. It just it doesn't take into account the impacts on people, and it's a very extracting, you know, process that just kind of eats up everything in its way. As far as, you know, how my own particular approach to finances and stuff is being like, the issue for me is getting away from having to participate in that system. So that's where we, you know, when we talk about patchwork, we talk about, you know, co-owning large spaces and those kinds of things, right? Where we pay off loans, and we wouldn't necessarily each individually own something. Like even say, I was talking about this the other day with someone about a kind of patchwork that would be, someone would, right in the middle of a city, they would kind of buy up a neighborhood, and they would create a cooperative housing project that would be completely ecologically sustainable and have zero carbon footprint, those kind of things. And, you know, the people in it would be running it. So they wouldn't have to necessarily have jobs, because some of them would be doing the food production, some of them would be doing the caretaking, some would be doing the management, those kind of things, right? So my ideal situation would be that we would continue to move out of the capitalist system, and especially with things like local food production, right? Like if we're creating all our own food, we don't need to go to the grocery store and buy them. So we need less money, right? In the transition point, obviously people, you know, if we're going to start do the actual patchworking as an adjective, is, you know, we're going to have people who have an income and participate in that system, but then that income is, you know, somehow used to further for the interests of the group, right?
Right. Sure. How do you feel about guns? Because I don't know about you, but my communist patch is going to have mad guns, and specifically, they're probably going to be 3D printed guns, and it's going to be awesome. But are you into guns?
I wouldn't say I'm into guns, but I definitely would rather have a gun than not have a gun in a situation like that. Because I'm, like I said, kind of at the top of what we were talking about. My leanings are, and the research that I do is, you know, we're heading towards collapse here. So I'm definitely interested in having guns when other people have them, and that kind of thing. And there were, like I said, there's different people as part of my own personal project. You know, we have military people who are involved in that too, and they have guns. They have really big, awesome guns. So, you know, and that's the specifics of patchwork. We talk about that, like even Moldbug talks about that, about the issue of security. How are we going to secure patchwork against those who would otherwise tear it asunder, right?
Right. So this is kind of coming up in the chat. People are kind of making different comments, but I guess one way you could summarize a few of the comments in the chat is people are kind of saying they're talking about or asking about this question of how the communist patch would defend itself against other patches, because you know, if the communist patch were to really succeed on and take off on a sustainable vector that's genuinely communist, and like that would be, it would by definition be a threat to the established order. It would become very attractive to others. It would you know, really but it would potentially really undermine the fabric of the current social order as we know it. And if it's not doing that, then it probably is evidence that it's not really communism, or capitalism is integrating it just fine, you know? So there probably would come a moment, if the communist patch was truly successful, where there would be severe confrontation with, you know, the police or however you want to conceptualize the established order. And so people in the chat are, I think, interestingly and rightly bringing up cases of for instance, like the Bundy Ranch standoff. Did you follow that in the U.S. a year or two ago?
Yeah.
Yeah, and like, you know, the Ruby Ridge, the history of Ruby Ridge and Waco. And again, it's very fascinating that these are generally kind of seen as right-leaning or, you know, quite explicitly right-wing projects and instances.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems to me, you know, one key question in theorizing the communist patch would be how that gets resolved for the communist patch. So I'm just curious if you have any other, have you given that much thought, or do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that.
Shoot, man. Shoot.
Again, so we go back to, you know, I don't want to, you know, confound the difference between what I'm trying to do, or whether I'm trying to start a cult outside of town, or whether it's a communistic patchwork. And as an aside, actually, I wouldn't say, I don't like using the word communism in that. It's more communistic, because again, I want to get away from that kind of traditional Marxist trajectory of that. But that being said, the issue of security and those kinds of things are kind of dealt with in the approach to taking over the municipality. Okay, so
oh yeah, because you control the police.
Yeah, because it's not an instance where you want to create a patch that's like, I'm going over here and everyone go fuck themselves, right? It's more of how are you growing the patch from within the existing order? Because let's be honest, who's going to escape the existing order that we're having? There's no way we can just move to the forest and do a Ted Kaczynski or something like that and just, you know, live in a giant cabin where everyone's, you know, whatever. But so my approach would be that it's more of a collaborative defense. So you're participating in the municipal goings on of governance in your area. You're not just separate and throw up a big wall and say, don't come over my fucking wall. Right. Mm-hmm. That being said, there are individual and specific needs of security. Right. So there is a need for security forces, or there is a need for guns, or whatever the case may be. But that, for me, again, takes a back seat, because we're trying to build something that's inclusive, that people want to participate in. They don't want to attack because it's frightening them. The idea of creating something like that would be, there would be avenues for people to just participate and grow it even bigger.
So that's an interesting disagreement then that might be productive for us to talk about, because the way I imagine it is more militant. I imagine it not inclusive. And this is where like the theme of exit and kind of you could even call it sort of the aesthetics of exit as opposed to voice come in for me, because I'm sort of like, the more attractive and more realistic way of building the communist patch in my kind of practical imaginary is you carve out something really radically unique and radically powerful and uniquely effective with strong walls and strong borders, and you make it work really damn well in a militant confrontational way, but in a way that works, in a way that isn't going to get shot down by the police, or in a way that isn't going to, you know, fail for some other, you know, failure mode. But so it's not inclusive. It's not like open membrane. It doesn't allow many people to participate other than like the group that is signed on to participate. But the contagion mechanism, or the spreading or scaling mechanism, I should say, the scaling mechanism is contagion in my imagination. So once you have a kind of radically carved out separate exit pod and communism is built and is working, you know, big question mark there, but once you have that going, other people see that it can work, and it's just an obviously way more attractive way to live. So then you see a cascade of defections from the status quo. So like people who are currently working office jobs, living like a shitty, meaningless life, they drop what they're doing and they're like, oh, I understand this model. I can do this with my friends and my family. And then they go and make their own militantly independent exit pod. And then you have all of these communist exit pods. And maybe you can imagine some sort of like linkages or federations based on affinity after the fact, but that comes after a kind of organic contagion mechanism.
Yeah, I don't know. I tend to want to shy away from those, even though I enjoy confrontation sometimes. Those antagonistic kind of approaches, right? And what it sounds like to me is you're saying in a little bit is that you're saying create a communist franchise, and then other people can open up communist patchwork franchises.
Or a reproducible model.
Yeah, a reproducible model, right? But
yeah.
But that's, again, that's not necessarily, I don't think that works. I don't think it's practical. I don't think it's like, you see things like those, you know, those instances where the FBI or whatever does come in and they do break up people's compounds or whatever the case may be. That's too antagonistic. And that's why my approach is really focused on municipalities again, because you want to grow the patch kind of from within and neighborhood by neighborhood or region by region. And so this is where the specifics of how to build a patchwork come in, is that if you control, or if you are participating and you in the municipal government level, you can control zoning. You can control the business that comes into that area because of zoning. You can control housing regulations.
Right.
These are the things that need to change. Is you know, instead of just creating something new somewhere else, kind of ex nihilo or whatever, but instead of, you know, what I think we would need to do is to do it from within and have, you know, neighborhood by neighborhood. And part of that too is this whole idea of not building consensus, but, you know, the whole issue of consciousness raising and changing people's minds and, you know, the hearts and minds or whatever you want to call it. But these are the discussions that we have to have in town hall meetings. These are the discussions we have to have door to door when we're campaigning, you know, as city councilors and stuff like that. So to make successful, lasting, real change, it has to take place on lots of levels. We can't just say, fuck you, we're going to build a wall, and if it works, try it somewhere else, right? But I appreciate what you're saying, because once there are successes, right? I get the idea that when there's successes, that can be contagious and they can be tried elsewhere. But again, with the specificity of everyone's different bioregions, you need, you know, those models aren't going to be translatable, you know, in all cases, or in most cases, maybe. That has to be built person to person, family to family, neighborhood to neighborhood. And those are things we're losing when we talk at abstract levels about how to do these kinds of things without appreciating the hard work that it's going to take to do it, right?
Yeah, no, those are good points for sure. And I appreciate in particular the idea of at least going slow at first and building gaining those institutional levers just as a kind of how should I put it, you know, slowly building kind of footholds in the in the power structures that will be relevant for like protecting the project. You know, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think actually like the I forgot the guy's name from the Wild Wild Country movie. I think his name is Osho, if I recall correctly. I think he's like the personality cult leader. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. But that's where like that, I think that group, I mean, that group was crazy, but that was one thing that they got right was they went in and they did everything you're saying. They took over the power. They changed the zoning. They controlled all of that. They got control of that first. But then what they did was, I mean, like culturally militant. I mean, like they didn't really give a fuck what the normies in the neighborhood thought about them is all I mean by militant. So I don't mean like provoking some sort of standoff like Bundy Ranch style. I think that's like doomed. That's doomed. You want to avoid that for sure. But I mean like a more culturally militant attitude of like, okay, we the communist group that are like moving into this like this isn't like a family friendly like let's all sing kumbaya thing. This is like, no, we're a few people who have a crazy fucking idea about like overthrowing society and we're gonna move in and implement these crazy ideas as like a unified group. And anyone around who doesn't like it or who is normal or horrified by it or anything, like we're just going to, you know, like we're not going to attack them, but we're going to ignore them. And we're not going to spend any energy trying to convince them or integrate them or meet them halfway, because I think that's where actually that's a good point of contention, I think, for communist theorists, because I used to be much more bullish on that model of like direct democracy and organic, spontaneous, you know, collective class consciousness being a kind of likely and natural phenomenon for all like people. But I guess I've become much more skeptical of that. And my sense is that like normal people, I don't know. I I don't see communism working through, like, to me, that's the voice. That's voice, right? And all the mistakes that come with voice, you know, when you have to meet so many people halfway, I think there is a tendency for there are just natural kind of repressive, often resentocratic tendencies start to sink their teeth into any like meaningful radical project. And maybe that sounds aristocratic, maybe that sounds elitist, and maybe I'm guilty a little bit of some of those things, but my mind has kind of changed a little bit on that. And that's why nowadays I'm kind of like, you know, I don't believe in forcing anything on anyone. And I believe in treating everyone with dignity and respect, and, you know, being open to voice if someone, you know, if I want to work with someone, but otherwise not wasting any time trying to convince people or negotiate with people, and just exit and build the fucking thing, and don't take no for an answer. Or if someone doesn't like it, just ignore them. I don't know.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I think some of it is, for me though, is being militant doesn't work. Being culturally militant isn't a good way to get people involved or on board with what you're doing. I've found out, you know, working in the community development field for so many years, is that as soon as you start saying I have a better idea than you, most people shut off. They stop listening, right? Because then you get into the whole ego politics and biases and all this other bullshit that we have to deal with as human beings with communicating with each other. So my interest would be, again, having those conversations, and this is where, you know, again, I pull back from communism and think about more specifically what's happening on the ground. Is you don't talk to people about changing society and changing the radical thing, and how much you're against capitalism, and how capitalism, this is my personal dig, how capitalism's coming from the future or as an alien presence or some bullshit like that. But you talk to them about where they want to go to school, where they want to live, what kind of house they want to live. Do they want solar panels on their roof? Do they want to live in a community that does X, Y, Z? Right? Those are the things that you talk about, and that you build people's interest in. And if they become interested in those things, they start to change their lifestyle. They start to change what they're doing. They change their habits, and you can say, you know, come to a permaculture meeting, come see how it is to grow your own food on your roof, those kinds of things, right? So again, that's why the local approach to me is just, you know, it cannot be just washed away. If you start from, you know, creating networking and creating these communities, and then, like you said previously, and I think that was brilliant, is that just living that way, that lifestyle, and having those kinds of networks is a direct challenge to the status quo.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, part of me thinks that this is a kind of multiple equilibria phenomena issue that we're talking about here. Like, there are the model you're describing has its own set of assumptions that are plausible and potentially viable, and it makes sense with, you know, internally as one possible pathway. And the one that I'm kind of, I guess, more leaning towards is it's a totally different model, and kind of but maybe both could work in different ways, and like maybe the only real way to figure it out is to test it empirically. And that's kind of like what's attractive about patchwork, is people can have their different pilot projects and you see what works. But like what I'm thinking specifically is, you know, like there's a trade-off, for instance, between who exactly you're trying to mobilize. So your model is more focused on mobilizing like a large number of others, and the decisions that you would make to adopt a posture and communicate in a way that works for that goes in one, you know, general direction. But the trade-off is the activist base, like the cohesion and the energy and enthusiasm of like the activist core. So in your model, that's a drawback, because the more you have to negotiate with large numbers of others, the more the cohesion and enthusiasm of the core gets kind of diluted. And my model puts more of a wager on the enthusiasm of the activist core. So like by saying, you know, just disregard altogether what normal people think and just focus on optimizing for the activist core, and a radical exit from everyone else, really. You know, like my model would get a way more energy and intensity internally, but it would face like larger challenges on the outside of the membrane, whereas your model would have it's focusing basically on the membrane itself, but then you have like internal morale and energy issues, I think. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but
yeah, that makes sense. And I definitely sympathize with that. But I think the times that I've been involved with radical social movements and things like that is that, we can totally disregard the normies if you want, but those are the normies that have control of, a lot of what we need control of. And so the negotiation between the normies and the radicals, let's just say for the sake of argument, becomes one of necessity. It's not, if we want to this radical exit, I can't see it as sustainable. And it's not that I want everyone in the world to, follow communist patchwork and we all just hold hands in this ecological utopia. It's more of a practical approach. Like, how can we get this done? How can we make this how can we tear this part of our neighborhood down and create cooperative housing that's ecologically friendly?
Right, definitely. So no, and I think your model is just as coherent as mine. Is basically what I was trying to say. It's a different set of strategic wagers, and it's a different kind of system. And that's why this is a very interesting conversation, because comparing these differences of how we think, is very productive. Like for me, I actually used to think very much along those lines. And I guess for me, I've moved away from it in part because of my kind of radical disillusionment with like what, contemporary leftist human beings even are. Like, I think my model of what they were, what it means to be like a leftist person who's like generally interested in this kind of like building egalitarian community. Like, I guess my reading of like what the average person who claims to be interested in building egalitarian community, my model of who that average person is very different than what it used to be. And here, I guess I have been very influenced by people like Nick Land and I guess people like Moldbug. And I'm curious, just because I know you're kind of up on that stuff, at least somewhat, it seems. And I think you pay more respect to that stuff than maybe the average, person who's interested in the model that you're interested in. So that's why I want to kind of dig even deeper on these themes, because I want to know more about how you still believe in your, model, which is very egalitarian, puts a lot of faith in, the masses. It puts a lot of trust and into the idea of, that people are cooperative, generally sincere people who are, just looking for like Pareto improvements. Whereas, like someone like Nick Land, makes pretty compelling arguments that actually, all of those people you're going to find yourself kind of trying to interact with in the community, underneath like the drive for egalitarianism is all kinds of resentment and bitterness and wills to, to lie and destroy and extract and, all kinds of like hidden pathologies, and I don't know, in my own experience, that has been kind of vindicated a lot. And that's one reason why I want to kind of get on the boat that you're on, but I'm also a little bit like, I'm just less bullish on it. Maybe, I don't know. You could pick up any part of that and try to like respond or change gears if you want. But that was just like a little bit of I'm trying to open up a little bit of a debate that might be productive. I don't know.
I got you. I could have a lot to say on Nick Land's particular position, but I'll hold that for now. But it's, I guess what I would say in response to all that, Justin, is, yeah, people are definitely have their biases. People definitely are selfish, cruel, whatever you want, like, whatever we want to characterize the people who don't share our views, if we want to demonize them or whatever we want to do. The point being for me is that if we rally people, and rally maybe is too much of a cheerleading word, but if we get people interested, if we tap into their basic human interests about shelter, food, clothing, sex, drugs, rock and roll, whatever it is, getting people involved, then we're doing the work of changing those minds. We're doing the work of having those conversations and and finding common agreement. What I would call in a paper I wrote way back when I was in academia is the uncommon commons, right? So we may not share everything in common, but we can have a commons. There is a way to bring everyone to the table, or at least bring people to a table to talk about practical issues and not necessarily voice, because I don't care about voice. I don't really, that doesn't bother me. That's not my interest. People can rant and rave about whatever ideology they want, but what does that translate into what they're actually doing? How is it changing your living situation? How is it changing the food, the circulation of food in your community? Those kinds of things, right? So I sympathize with the idea of saying, people are just really stupid and I'm being unfair, but people are not not necessarily capable of building the kind of consensus that a left-wing ideologue would want, or something like that. I'm sympathetic to that, but the work of actually getting people to change what they're doing has to take place at that psychological level, has to take place at the level of policy, and in terms of what they are doing day to day, where they lay their heads at night. And if we're gonna kind of step back from that, saying, okay, well, let's figure out some cybernetic solution to the whole shebang, or let's find out like how to operate a communistic economy without taking to advance the micro level issues of talking to people, getting them involved in projects, and getting them to change their lifestyles. I see that as equally naive as saying that we can come at it from an approach, let's just say certain kinds of accelerationism, where their faith is put in, corporate practices or capitalistic ways of doing things that can make a change circumventing human agency. I don't think that's possible. I think, I think that's just fascism, and it's fascism under various different guises. If you're going to say, well, we have these 17 experts who know exactly how to run a society, and everyone should just fall in line with cattle. That's not sustainable. That's not something I want to be part of, right?
Right. Well, I guess, yeah, no, that's fair for sure. I appreciate how you see that. I guess a lot of my instincts are consistent with what you said. But I think you can have interesting debates about, what people really are, what people really are like. And I think that there are ways to be realistic about the limitations of most people and the temperamental issues of a diverse group of people. And to be radically kind of cool-headed and realistic about, the distribution of abilities and the distribution of temperaments and personality traits and all of that, and how they interact, or often, fail to interact. And I think you can be radically cool-headed and kind of analytically cold about that from an engineering perspective, and also think, well, surely we can create a much better type of social arrangement or community than what most people currently enjoy in sclerotic Western societies. And to me, it's just like a matter of having the most accurate model of how humans actually work, and then optimizing for the most widespread welfare benefits, basically.
Flourishing.
Yeah, I love the word flourishing. I think I still love, that's one word that I love from the leftist canon, and that's exactly how I couldn't put it better myself. So I mean, maybe just to fix ideas a little bit, I'll give you like a really just embarrassingly stupid kind of cartoon version of my kind of like rough practical vision, and it's so stupid. It's like completely not thought out and not impressive, but just to kind of fix ideas a little bit and give us more kind of concretes to debate about. It might be productive and also just kind of funny. I don't imagine some sort of like fascist, like personality cult or anything like that, but it's more like, I mean, my practical model would be something like, you just have like 5 or 10 highly successful internet businesses, and maybe that means like getting like people who already have like pretty successful internet businesses or whatever, or you just get together with a bunch of other smart people, and you make like a bunch of like agile, simple, relatively easy to automate types of purely digital internet based businesses that are successful and make like a good chunk of money, not like super rich, but you have a few internet businesses that make good money. Maybe you have like a few of them, and then you go somewhere super cheap. You buy like a 20 acres, 30 acres, whatever, just like you said. You buy a house or two with like money from successful functioning commercial enterprises that are location independent, that exist fully in cyberspace. You buy up some land and some houses, and then everyone, like those people, their friends and their family, and maybe a few strangers that they want to, take on board according to like the calculations of how many like, diverse, heterogeneous strangers a community can functionally sustain. And like with the money from like a bunch of like, I don't know, internet businesses, you just basically fund like a healthy, egalitarian, tight-knit, cohesive community on like a private plot of land. And then you also do the things you said. I think that's all really smart. Like you also take over the local government. You also take over the zoning laws or whatever. But basically the idea is like you just fund the thing with highly agile and successful, internet age income streams that are automated. So you're basically using, this is like, to me, the practical instantiation of, the meme about fully automated luxury communism. To me, that if that means anything, it means you fucking learn how to use computers to make money in an easy way, and then you use that money to sustain like a commune, basically. But you do it like in a more functional and effective way. You use everything we know about science, everything we know about human psychology, everything we know about group psychology. You use cutting edge knowledge about permaculture, these things. You use personality science to align people and connect people in optimal ways. You use cutting edge knowledge about how to manage successful relationships, and you engineer an optimal culture in a fairly rigorous and aggressive way. Like you really, everyone has to kind of agree to make this, to optimize for flourishing. And I think when everyone agrees to optimize for flourishing, that means you're going to have some strange rules, and people are going to have to kind of collectively, enforce each other in a kind of Rousseauian way. Your people are going to have to kind of force each other to be free. But I think that could be figured out, and in ways that are not really being, experimented with, in part because for the people that self-select into building communes, or, I think it's fair to say probably like I would wager the community that you're a part of, the people who self-select into these types of ideas and cooperative projects are generally like temperamentally averse to the idea of like, all right, let's start by just like making a shitload of money and then figure out how to use that in like the most aggressive way possible towards the sustaining of communism. So that's, to me, that's my estimate of like where the bottleneck is. Like there's a kind of aversion to the cool-headed like engineering of successful commerce and of optimal culture design and the enforcement that would require. People who want communism are generally like averse to that. And to me, if you can solve that bottleneck, you could really create like a highly functional patch that, once you have some people doing that in a way that's commercially successful, where money is abundant, people are thriving economically and their relationships are thriving, and it's like actual legit communism where like everyone is guaranteed dignified, relatively equalitarian lifestyles. Like if you can engineer that, then it's like, that's when you'd start seeing massive organic defections from the status quo. Like office workers would just be like, fuck this, I'm doing what those people did, so that's my crazy model.
Yes to all of that. Absolutely. I mean, that's a great way to do it. And like I'd want to always remind is that there's no one way to do it, right? So if someone can do that and kind of instantiate that in the world, then sure, it makes the efforts of someone, say like 2 communities down, who's doing it in an existing community, neighborhood by neighborhood, instead of moving out, better. Because like you say, it's more attractive. Like it's a model to look over there and say, look at these people, they're flourishing. Like why wouldn't we want to participate in this kind of thing? Right. So right. I think it's an and both situation where both those models and those approaches you got to kind of take in stride, right?
Sure. Yeah. Sure. We have a question from Callum. Wants us to talk about the interaction between local solutions like patchwork and climate catastrophe. If you've given up on the global, surely you just have to be resigned to climate change happening. Do you have any interesting hot takes on how this connects to climate, Michael?
Sure, I'll try. The second one, I don't think that's true. I don't think if you're focused on local that you're giving up on climate change, because honestly, that's the only way I think that, not the only way, but that's primarily the way we're going to anchor changes in lifestyle, which is what drives the global economy, is our consumption practices, right? So if we're not shipping food all over the place. Someone said to me yesterday, they're like, we bought apples from California, and their friend is buying apples that are like 60 kilometers from here. So we're shipping our apples down to California, and they're shipping theirs up here. That's just fucking insanity.
Yeah.
It's fucking insanity, right? So I mean, to end some of these issues like transportation, right? So we're shipping all this crap all over the world. Then it's withdrawing from those consumption practices, and that's a local thing. But the first part of that question, can you just restate it again?
Oh, yeah, sure. Callum asks, can you just talk about the interaction between local solutions like patchwork and climate catastrophe? So, yeah.
Well, I'm definitely in kind of the doom camp of people who say, it is coming. So for me, it's not necessarily, we can't avert it at this point. The research that I've seen lately, at least, coming out is it's inevitable. It's more about adaptation at this point. So how are we building our patchwork to be resilient enough to adapt to the different changes that are coming, right? So I, in a sense, I am resigned to dealing with climate change, but I want to take a proactive, resilience-based kind of approach to that. And that's why local food sourcing and local economies and stuff like that are so important, because once that collapse starts to happen, those global processes are going to all shut down. Supply lines are going to shut down. We're not going to be able to go to the grocery store and get our groceries anymore.
Right.
So yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, Callum had a kind of follow-up question where he's kind of clarifying, I think, what he's after. So if I understand him correctly, like he's asking, is your model presuming catastrophe? Like, is your model basically post-catastrophe? Like it's going to, maybe you think it's optimal for like riding out catastrophes, but it's not really trying to stop them or anything like that. Is that fair to say?
I'm gonna again go with the both, because it's this is a model that you can start doing now in your neighborhoods and your communities now, and we are trying to do it. But it is definitely my take on it is definitely geared towards adaptation as collapse happens. I'm definitely not in the camp that we're heading towards some kind of singularity process where some kind of techno optimism where society is just going to inherently become better because we have AI or whatever the case may be. But we're not going to, my opinion is, we're not going to get there. We're not going to get to the point of singularity because shit's going to fall apart before then. And again, it's the way I want to frame it, and I would always fall back on, is an adaptive model. So as things happens, you shift and you change. You figure out, how to adapt with the different temperatures in agriculture, and stuff like that. Like we address it as it goes. But to answer his question directly, yes, it's geared towards the acceptance that there's going to be some major changes coming up. I'm not going to predict what those are in any kind of detail, because I think that's just crazy, but that's not
right. Yeah, no, that makes sense to me. There's a question from Lindsay Lohan. I suspect it's not the real Lindsay Lohan, but we can imagine maybe it is. Who asks, I guess this is directed to me, how are the office workers going to get money, though? Not everyone can have a successful internet business. So I guess that's asking about, in my model, I referred to a kind of cascade moment where a bunch of, your average office worker would see the functioning communist patch, and they would jump ship from their current status quo position in society and make their own communist patch. So, it's a good question. I think it's a really good question. And I guess my short answer, I don't know if this is true, but my short answer is, I think it's not clear to me that everyone can't have a successful internet business. Because, obviously they can't in the same domain, but I think there's this kind of leftist idea that under capitalism, like there has to be, like, not everyone can succeed. I think a lot of leftists have this idea that it's a zero-sum game, and of course, like the whole kind of like ridiculously powerful, almost magical significance of capitalism is precisely that it's a system that's the opposite, where it's based on, you know, positive sum exchanges. It's actually the reason it's so explosively productive, and such a like a world change, like a world historical eruption, is precisely because of all the ways of organizing, you know, human production. It's the only one we've ever chanced upon where actually like everyone who can create some value can all gain by cooperating. So I guess, I mean, and look, I'm an anti-capitalist basically. Like I think it's a horrible system that fundamentally distorts like the nature of true being and fucks people up in profound ways. So all of my instincts are essentially anti-capitalist. I think it's a horrific injustice to the true nature of human being. And yet I can see that I just don't, I guess I reject the idea that not everyone can have successful businesses. Now, one thing that I think is more legitimate in the question is some people don't have, I do believe that some people don't have the skills or capacities to run, like to start or run like complex economic enterprises. I think that's an unfortunate fact that as far as I can tell is true. So there are some people who can't themselves independently like run a business. That's probably true. But that one of their friends or family can, you know, like I think you only need like one successful person who's like really good at business and shit like that. You only need like one computer scientist and one like good business manager to basically have a successful small business that can fund the lives of like at least a handful of others, you know? And so it's like, that's the economic logic that makes communism like workable. It's like you only need so many successful, like blessed people with the resources and capital and skills that are required to have like a good income stream. They can support, you know, other people. And that's like why communism can work. The problem, the real engineering puzzle that no one's been able to figure out in human history, and not to say I'm like going to figure it out, but I'm saying I think there are exciting opportunities to figure this out in our generation that haven't been available before, is that the problem is that communism has never been in the interest of those people who are relatively blessed with capital and skills and temperamental traits that you know, advantage them in economic production. Those people it's never been in their interest to subscribe to a communist community. And that's in part because, you know, we're still like, modern society is still like fairly infantile. Like we've only had so many iterations to try these things. And my wager is that you can actually, I think like from a more rigorous understanding of social science and how people work and what people need to feel happy and optimized, I think you actually can arrange a communist relations in small groups in which currently like highly functioning, you know, like super intelligent, super conscientious computer scientists and engineers or whatever, like people who can actually like run a business that sustains like 5 or 10 other people, like those people, that we can create relationships in which those super productive people want to live in a small commune with 10 other people. If those 10 other people can arrange their attitudes and behaviors in a way that makes the lifestyle better for that like super productive person than it currently is in their like animistic, you know, atomized, like currently meaningless life. So again, that's like a very strange idea. And this rubs very much against the instincts and temperaments of most people who are interested in like left-wing projects. Cause it sounds like I'm like trying to like, you know, suck the dick of like successful productive capitalists or something like that. And leftists generally want to villainize those people. But I'm kind of like, let's figure out a way to get those people to opt into communism to support all of our lazy, unproductive asses so we can just be free and like make art and shit.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I think I'll give you an example from the stuff that I'm trying to do personally. Is that, you know, one of our group is a doctor. She's a specialist, and she earns enough money. She earns, you know, basically, and sorry if you're listening to this, but she basically earns, you know, upwards of 20 grand per month, right? And so in a rural setting, in a, you know, a small little patchwork setting, that's going to take care of how many people?
Right.
like the basic needs, especially if we're growing our own food and we're getting our energy from solar panels that are coming, the energy falling from the sky.
Hell yeah.
And all those kinds of things is like, we'll have the bases covered by the people who are still getting income, and all the rest of the things are taken care of by people who are living there and don't have jobs, that have done full exit and those kind of things. And the benefit for you, like you said, from our doctor friend, or for someone like myself who has a high income, is that we get to live in that situation and we get to develop those relationships. So we don't need to keep our money and our income. We can share it with the group because we have a pretty fucking awesome group to hang out with all the time.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So have you guys kind of like talked and planned about like how you would do like income merging or sharing, or like what have you thought about that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It would all be budgeted. It'd all be allotted, right? And those kind of things. And income share, we're a huge, for lack of a better term, value-based commies, right? So we don't give a shit about material possessions and things like that. Is if we can have our patchwork, we don't want them. We're doing other stuff. We're throwing parties, having barbecues, whatever the case may be, right?
Right. Nice.
But I mean, okay. Yeah, but it's been worked out. Like there's between 3 or 4 really heavy income earners, we can support 30 people.
Right. Okay. So this is kind of what I was trying to get at. I was curious about you without trying to pry too much, when I was asking you about like where you come down on the question of commerce. Mm-hmm. I was kind of trying to like understand better, what your views on money and your with your current project and your vision for it, like the role what money would play or not play. So that kind of clarifies more what my original question was about. So that's interesting. It sounds like, in other words, it sounds like you're more like of a commercialist maybe than some communists would be, because some people would be like, would kind of like demonize you folks for even bringing like, functional working jobs and like large sums of money into the, they would see that as like a source of problematic inequality and, capitalistic like ickiness,
It's not like we're running a Starbucks to fund our patchwork, right?
Yeah.
This she's a doctor, she's a specialist, she helps people every day. And I get the kind of sense of saying, oh, it's not true communism, but fuck your communism. Do what works, do what makes people happy. And if it's about optimizing flourishing and it's working, then that's what we do. And like the question that was asked before, so what happens is collapse and things like that, and your internet businesses fall down, then you shift and you adjust. You make your patch such that it's resilient enough to deal with those things.
Yeah, definitely. But when you have a really healthy community, you can make those changes quickly and easily.
Absolutely.
Like I think one of the reasons why unemployment and economic, shocks and insecurity is so terrifying and so stressful for people, and it can be so demoralizing and depressing for people, is because the actual quality of their psychological and emotional and community life is such utter shit. And like so much of their stability and identity comes from the stability of their paycheck, that if you fuck with that paycheck, if anything goes like out of the ordinary, they go into like meltdown mode. They lose their cool head. They're not able to, everything starts to crash and they're not able to bounce back. But like if you have multiple income streams that are diversified among your commune, and you also like know that you're deeply loved and you actually belong somewhere in a deep way, like one case of unemployment is like no big deal. You just relax, you take some time off, and then you like figure out what you're going to do next with the love and support and financial insurance of your comrades.
Yeah. Well, my take would be we try to maximize unemployment in our patch.
Nice. Yeah.
Like that's the idea of having just enough linkage to the capitalist system that you can extract what you need and still survive, but build some space elsewhere that's not completely separate, but is also a space of growth and creativity where you can create new social relations and things like that, right?
Yeah, hell yeah, that's awesome. So we have a question from Large Cancer, probably friends with Lindsay Lohan. Do you have any thoughts on the impact of suburbs on the capacity for resistance? And they follow up by saying that this and the consequent homogenization of lifestyles, among other things, seem to be enormous hurdles for building local loyalties.
Absolutely. I mean, the issue with lifestyles is fundamental to what I'm talking about, right? And changing changing your lifestyles, your habits, the way you habitate, the way you get your food, all of that stuff. And suburbanization is well, it's terrible. It's like you said, it's homogenizing, and it puts us into neighborhoods that are not the kind of neighborhood that I want to live in, and definitely not the kind of neighborhood that I would have in a patch. So to be kind of just simplistic about that, the urban sprawl aspect of that's not ecologically sustainable either. And again, my patchwork would be, or the patchwork I would advocate for would be very, very interested in the bioregion and how the impacts of an suburban community has on that region and what its use. If I live in the suburbs and I drive 45 minutes into town to go to my job, that's not living in line with my values, and it's not living in line with what we're trying to do with patchwork in terms of being ecologically sound and things like that too. So my view on urbanization or suburban realities is fuck that shit.
Right. Cool. Well, what is there anything I've been asking you questions? I've been kind of driving the conversation so far, but is there anything that you had on your mind, questions, comments, or anything you wanted to kind of put on the agenda?
Not really. I was kind of hoping there was some of the cave Twitter crowd would start a fight with me, but it doesn't seem like they want to.
Oh, well, tell me what you thought they might have started a fight with you about, and then I'll start it with you.
Okay. Well, it's a little bit of my interest in accelerationism, right? And just that model coming from someone like Nick Land that sees it as this massive, locked in, uncontrollable, at least by human agency, cybernetic system that's heading in a certain direction. I've gotten into it on Twitter with a bunch of the cave Twitter people about what it means to invest in that model in terms of your everyday life, like what you're doing on a daily basis. Are you sitting on the couch talking about the great singularity, but yet you're still completely complicit with the capitalist system? Does that model allow you some kind of line of flight where you can do things differently? Maybe not. Does it help? Does it help in terms of what's going on politically actually on the ground? If you exit from politics and praxis, but yet you still take the bus and work in your construction job or whatever the case may be, right? So I've criticized that model quite a bit and try to poke holes in it and say and give room, because I do have a background and interest in human interest and wanting agency to human agency and our capacities to increase. Like we talk about optimized human flourishing, and along with that is optimizing our ability to navigate our social environment, navigate politics, and be more rational and things like that. But a lot of the things that I've seen in acceleration is kind of just dampens that and wants to explain away human agency and talk about this massive cybernetic process. So anywhere in there we can pick a fight with whoever we want.
That was good, man. That was salacious. That was very. You got some fighting words for the unconditional accelerationists. I like this.
But I would preface that with I completely enjoy those guys and and those women and the other. And one of my favorite people online is Ed Berger. So I've gotten into it with him lots and others, and I enjoy it because I think they're very smart people and they have a very edgy perspective, and I'd like to see how it all plays out.
Yeah, no, of course they all have thick skins. They're interested in provocations and debates, so it's all good fun for sure. I just appreciate you're giving me a little, you're giving me something kind of juicy to spread. I just tweeted that Michael James is coming hard after UAC.
Oh no.
Yeah, so this is good. This is very good for my brand. I appreciate it, Michael. You're gonna drive some interest to people seeing how they're being attacked.
Yeah.
No, I think I saw Ed Berger in the house actually in the chat a bit ago.
Well,
but he might be listening.
Respect for, and I think the things that he says in terms of applying Marx and his vast knowledge of Marx in particular towards the question of accelerationism has been so helpful for me to understand a lot of the deeper implications of and the origins of where that theory comes from. So shut up.
Actually, so he says, he's in the chat. Ed says, personally speaking, my views ain't so different from Michael as presented here. So I don't see much to argue too much over. So
bastard. I want an argument, but yeah.
Yeah, no, it would be interesting. I would like to hear from some of the more unconditional accelerations people, how they would respond to your critique of their, it sounds like what you see as their, unjustified passivity.
Yeah, well, I think the way I framed it on Twitter when we got into the arguments about it was complicity with a system that's grinding this species and this planet into the fucking ground. And I'm not, and I like, even though the slick ideas of Land and other people like that, but I don't see any room in those pictures for a flourishing human species. Right? I
Right.
see a lot of post-humanist posturing talking about what we might become later, but I don't see about how are we going to, make ourselves better and take up our species as a project that's worthy of, going into the future with.
Right. Well, so I mean, I'm quite sympathetic to what you're saying about, still being interested in, creative human agency. I've always been, I guess I'm friends with a lot of the unconditional accelerationist people, and part of me is like very much, part of my thinking is very much in the spirit of that. But I've always been a little bit more sympathetic, I think, to, yeah, like, let's still think about how we can, creatively manipulate this massive, capitalist system that in many ways is obviously just, even just aesthetically and in terms of desire, just, not really like the best way to live, like just for the fun of it, even like for the aesthetics of it, or for the fun of the challenge, or whatever it might be. Like, even if you think capitalism is a fait accompli and it's a kind of super intelligent system that is now in the pilot seat, even if you think that, I think there's still a strong case to be made to say, well, so long as you're here, so long as you're still a human and you are living, you might as well try to fuck shit up in the most interesting and brilliant way you can to maximize your own flourishing, even if that only means like you only move the dial an inch. It's worth it to try to optimize that, is my view. So
I think the unconditional accelerationists, they give room, space for that too, right? Because they say, I think it was Vince Garten or someone like that said, "Do what thou willst," right? It's a matter. It's kind of this idea of letting go and leaning into the process, but still just doing whatever you're going to do to make yourself happy, probably, right?
Right. I think, yeah, most of the unconditional accelerationist people, as far as I understand them, are pretty, fairly sympathetic to this idea of like, yeah, do as you please. Like, they're not saying you can't do stuff, or that all is not worth doing. But yeah, and I guess Ed kind of agreed, as Ed said. Ed tends to agree with you, in a lot of respects. So that's interesting. But
well, the question of the efficacy of human agency is what interests me in that whole orbit too, right? Is if we're talking large scale systems that are locked in and they're going a certain direction, and human agency has no impact in it, and I just don't see the practical viability of implementing that as a way of thinking or even as a project, because it'll lead to species extinction. But I also don't see, I don't know. I guess that's where my interest lies, is talking about what we can do with human agency. And I don't like that. And what I always take exception to is the idea that capitalism or capital in and of itself is something that is doing something to us and that we are not doing. Right. And that comes, and I could relate it to something in the orbit of Ray Brassier and Nick Land. When Ray was talking, he gave a lecture about Nick Land's work and said, that Nick is all tactics. He's all, cybernetics and how the machinic process works. But in the world we live in, and this was Ray's critique, is that there was no strategy, there was no agency, there was no people trying to control that system. And if you don't respect that space in the wider processes where there are people driving these systems, and you be complicit with the machinic processes, I guess, then there are going to be elites, the 1%, whatever you want to call them, that will have the strategy. So if we're not going to do it, we're not going to have the praxis, we're going to be anti-praxis, we're going to just do our day-to-day and just, lean into the process. There are human beings out there with control and they're in a position to make decisions that will decide what happens to us. right? Whether if we want to participate in politics or not, there are politicians and their political processes that will run us over.
Well, I mean, I don't know how much I agree with this, but I think I'll kind of try to my best to ape a kind of right accelerationist retort to what you're saying, which might be something like it's not that our actions don't contribute to capitalism, and that it's purely this kind of force that only operates on us, that we don't also constitute it. Obviously, in some sense, it's human activity that constitutes a lot of what the capitalist system is and its movements, but it's more like capitalism selects what passes through, and capitalism's selection power, its selection discretion or something like that, is increasingly rigorous, and it's increasingly the only game in town, because it's increasingly efficient, I think, is the idea. So it's like we're free to do whatever we want, including anti-capitalist ventures, but the efficiency of global capitalism is increasing such that any creative departure from what capitalism dictates is more or less synonymous with death or suicide or just exiting the gene pool, basically. And so it's like, if you want to live and if you want your project to last over time to any degree, to be selected for what is allowed to exist through the capitalist selection filter, you have to follow the dictates of capitalism, which is essentially, I think a lot of people would say, on the right accelerationist viewpoint, it's just intelligence optimization, really. So it's like everyone do the best you can to make money and protect your own. But anything other than doing that at the most rigorous way is kind of like, it's a kind of like short-term human inefficiency that we're probably in like the last days of, and it will increasingly be kind of shed as dead weight. And it increasingly is being shed as dead weight. And that's why capitalism is so brutal. And that's why we hate it so much. And that's why it is so painful. And people rebel against it and rightfully find it so inhumane, is because it is inhuman. It's inhuman scale intelligence optimization that is painfully removing any space for us to be or do anything other than that which maximizes intelligence. But that this is not a arbitrary system that like bad people have put in place. And I think you agree with that. I think that's kind of what you were saying before. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know how much I agree with that, but I know that that's kind of like that's one way of understanding the right accelerationist perspective. And I wonder, maybe, do you want to respond to that? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I can. It's a little bit frustrating because I listened to your podcast with Nick Land, and he talks about increasing dehumanization, and that just makes me want to reach to the screen and grab him by the throat, right? Because it's like that's why people want to deplatform him and people say things like that, because it is dehumanizing, and it is taking the side of a system or a set of practices that is increasingly dehumanizing us, increasingly eating up the resources of the planet. So it's like, yeah, the bus, and this is an analogy I've heard many times that, from environmentalists, it's, yeah, the bus may be hurtling towards a wall at 60 kilometers an hour, but to say that we can't pull the brake or we can't jump off that bus is, so we might as well just, like, I don't know, have a party while the bus is heading that way, is doesn't lend itself to people trying to do better, right? And it doesn't lend itself to a practical strategy of taking on that system once you've become complicit with it and just said, well, this is the way it's going. That's right. Somehow I'd want to respond to the whole issue of optimizing human intelligence. We could go on for an hour about that, because or not human intelligence, optimizing intelligence, because I don't see intelligence as this abstract thing out there, this metaphysical entity that's not embodied in actual brains and actual machines, right? So again, it's a matter of how humans and human agency interacts with that system that's supposedly so efficient. It's not I mean, look at things like planned obsolescence and things like that. Like capitalism is not super efficient. That's a myth. That's a mythology, right? It's a system that's eating resources and making kind of surplus and a lot of useless products and waste and things like that. But it's not an efficient system. It's not a system that's properly designed to, for like we've been talking about, human optimization or human flourishing. Right. So anything that kind of dampens our ability or even confidence in taking on that system and making changes, I'm kind of against. Right. And any metaphysics that supports that, I'm kind of against, because clearly, at a very kind of basic sense, if all humans disappeared tomorrow, capitalism wouldn't just go on without us, right? And I don't think anyone's actually saying that. I want to be clear about that. But that human agency and human interests and desires, in particular, and consumption practices, are at the core of that system. So if we can tweak that system in various ways, then we can, better serve our desires and interests. Right? I guess that's kind of a really broad way to say it, but that's my interest. Is I don't like these kind of discourses that present a kind of inevitability to capitalism.
Right. Yeah, and no, and a major part of me is really with you, and I'm just trying to think through how, because I guess the other part of me is fairly sympathetic to the kind of right-wing accelerationist, cold water that gets poured on this. And I'm just trying to think, what is the best way to encapsulate that tension. I mean, one thing I would add to what you were saying is that I think there's a tragic dimension to human life, and I think that's quite apart from capitalism or any particular moment of human history. I think that in other words, I think that you can grant kind of the right accelerationist cold water that is constantly being poured on, left-wing aspirations to healthier, happier, more egalitarian, more humane communities on Earth now. That people actually want to build and are interested in building. I think that you can grant a lot of that right accelerationist critique and also just say, well, it's worth trying, even if, most human projects are doomed. Most human projects are doomed. Like, it's Sisyphus, right? I mean, this is kind of who we are. And it's kind of apart from wherever we might be at any particular historical junction. We're very limited creatures with, in some ways, imaginations and cognitive capacities that far outpace what we're able to do in our limited lifetimes sometimes. And yet, to me, none of the kind of right accelerationist critique has ever convinced me that I should fundamentally update or change my deep longing and aspiration for a radically better and truer form of living now, as soon as possible, by whatever means necessary. Even if it's hopeless. And I guess that's why I'm not sure that it's hopeless. I'm not capitulating to that, and I'm certainly not asking you to, but I'm willing to say, even if it is hopeless, even if a cold accounting of reality says it's almost certainly doomed, to me, a true human life still involves trying to do it. I don't know.
Well, that's the kind of creatures we are, right? That we give a shit, we care.
Yeah.
And if we're not kind of following those human interests, or that our life isn't sort of in that trajectory, then we're not being true to ourselves. We're not authentically us, and we're not being ourselves. We're just basically giving up, right? And I think everything you said is exactly right. I think, even if we can have all these doom scenarios, that trying to augment or try to change the trajectory, or to carve out some space, in my mind, this is where I come from, is carve out some space to adapt after the whole shitload collapses, right? Some kind of patch to the system that will allow human life to continue in whatever best way we can, like even if it's just survival at the first instance. But I'm more interested like in human flourishing, right? And I don't think, and again, back to some of these discussions I've had with people on the Twitter about this, is that I don't necessarily want to agree with the charge of being like an old school humanist either, because I think we are an evolving species, and we will change and adapt, and AI will, in particular, will change the way we interface with each other in the world. But I still want human agents to feel flourishing, and I like you were just saying, I still care enough to care about human life and individuals and all of that, to want a system where that's taken into account.
Right. Well, Michael, maybe do you want to tell me a little bit more about like what's on your agenda right now, like moving forward, like where are you at with, like, what's your current project? What are you currently kind of most interested in over the next week or couple months or year or whatever time frame is relevant?
In what sense? What kind of project? I have way too many projects.
Well, I guess you can answer however you want, whatever's most interesting to you. I guess I was kind of thinking your communist patch project, like fill us in a little bit on the details of like how does that look over the next, couple months or year, or what's next on the agenda for that for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, very immediately we have, I think it's in about a week and a half, we have a meeting with our banks. And so a bunch of us are changing our banks to be the same bank so that we can leverage all of our finances to come up with with loans, right? To purchase big swaths of land and to do some of the stuff that we want to do. So we're still at the planning stage where we're working on the very specific logistics of running a kind of a community like that, or, in terms of 24 acres or whatever it's going to end up being. But yeah, those of us who have the means are working on the financial aspects of it.
It sounds awesome, man. Like I'm definitely gonna be watching with a lot of interest and curiosity, and definitely support.
Well, you and your wife have an invite to come anytime. So.
Oh, dude, that's awesome. Can I do live streams there?
That wouldn't be my kind of patchwork if there wasn't live streams happening of some sort.
Nice, dude. Well, then I'll come find you in Alberta one of these days. That sounds awesome, man. I'm trying to think. Is there anything? I mean, I'm not in a rush to get off, but we've gone for almost 2 hours now. We've covered a lot of ground. I don't want to overtax you or anything. I feel like we had a pretty interesting and pretty widespread romp across the communist patchwork question. I guess there were lots of other things we could have potentially talked about, but since I read that piece today, that was, I guess, just what was on my mind. Was there anything else you wanted to get in the discussion?
No, I think there's a lot of things I could bring up. Again, I like the fights. I wanted some debate, but everyone's so nice out there. One question I do have: what the hell is Rose Twitter?
Rose Twitter. Oh, that's like the DSA.
What is the DSA?
Like the American Socialist camp.
Oh, okay.
So the Democrat, it stands for the Democratic Socialists of America.
Okay.
So like a lot of Bernie Sanders supporters. I don't know if you know, like Chapo Trap House.
Yeah.
That kind of like subculture, and a Jacobin, and those are kind of like the flagship signposts, I guess, of Rose Twitter. I feel
like an elderly person listening to some of these conversations about Rose Twitter, Pine Twitter, Cave Twitter.
Yeah,
it's too much sometimes. So that's the question I had, was what the hell was Rose Twitter? I got Pine Twitter. That was with the decelerationist.
Yeah, right? It is very strange. I wanna talk with some Rose Twitter people, but I've actually I've been back channeling a little bit with some Rose Twitter people, but I think they don't want to talk to me. Well, because it's more, they're much more in the kind of like institutionalized, politically sensitive types of subcultures. And, I mean, I'm pretty normal, pretty safe dude. But I guess like I'm kind of like a wild card, I guess, to like more normal leftists, because I do have conversations with, people who are like not approved. I've never had any conversations with anyone like especially evil, but, yeah, people who are kind of like outside the pale of like the known quantities, the known approved kind of like leftist intellectual figures that are known and approved in those circles. Like anyone who's kind of like too interested in stuff outside of that is kind of just, I think, generally seen as like potentially people are afraid of touching like anything that might get them called out somehow, so I don't know. I don't know. I might just be paranoid, but the few people I've talked about doing a thing with from like more traditional socialist American like subcultures, they were like, some people have been interested in doing a thing where we talk on some forum, but they've kind of like flaked a bit, and I get a little bit of a vibe that people from Rose Twitter don't want to come into these like internet circles that we're in, kind of. But
well, it's probably, I mean, the level, there's a whole different kinds of theories that you and like myself and other people, they're interested in this stuff, draw upon that would probably put them off because they may not have experience with that stuff, right?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Because it's kind of radical. We're talking about things that are kind of outside of what, like you called the normie culture, right?
Right.
So anyone who's I guess socialist in what this Rose Twitter would be, and correct me if I'm wrong, it would be someone interested in, like you said, in Bernie Sanders and doing the kind of traditional socialist route and those kind of things. And I think people like us are looking a little more on the fringe about how to get out of that system that's been completely co-opted and ground down.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Yeah, and I don't even mean that as a not like not better than anyone, or not. I'm not I'm not throwing shade on anyone, but like I think some people are more outside looking, and some people are more, they want to build their kind of walled garden, and that's not. I mean, that's fine. Like I think that's a fine way to live if that's what you prefer. But like I've always gotten the impression that like a site like Jacobin, for instance, it's like it's a pretty walled garden in the sense that it's like it's social milieus who know each other and like each other, and there's like a pretty agreed upon kind of like conceptual basis, and it's kind of like a club that is cool and interesting and fine, lots of smart people, but they're more or less trying to create like a little ecosystem that publishes people that are like approved in their group, kind of, and that's like a more inside model. That's a walled garden model, whereas like I guess I'm kind of just doing a very, very, very different thing in that I'm like actively seeking those people that I don't understand, and like the strangest, the most interesting people I can find, I'm just like trying to figure them out live,
I'll take that as a compliment.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I should have in this conversation, I should have plugged your blog more, syntheticzero.net. It's a very nice website, and you're very good at like keeping up on a lot of developments and sharing. You share a lot of other people's work, and so it's like it's a cool, and you obviously also do your own original theory blogging. So it's like a very valuable little website hub that you operate.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's probably been one of the most rewarding parts is being able to share different other people's perspectives, like, and having those conversations, between different enclaves of theory and practice and things like that. That's where my interest always has lied. I mean, career liaison and career someone who works in public health and stuff like that. You're always having deliberations and conversations, and I really appreciate the work you're doing with this kind of blogging or this kind of live streaming and stuff. Is that you're bringing these ideas in a way that people can accept, that are accessible, and you're posing open questions, right? Like you said, you're not actually getting into strong debates like you're wrong, this is wrong, my model is better than your model, but you seem to be trying to, if not find the best in each model, but explore possibilities in people's models and maybe build bridges and stuff like that. Yeah, and that's where I really appreciate that kind of take and that kind of approach, right?
Cool, man. I thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think you definitely understand part of what I'm trying to do, and it's always nice to feel like your project is kind of being understood. So I appreciate that. Thank you. I'm curious, how long have you been running Synthetic Zero?
Let's see, how long have we been doing that? I want to say 2013.
Okay.
I started it as trying to get people as a collective blog. So I don't know if I want to out people here, but who used to, but Ed Berger used to post on that on my website as well.
Okay, cool.
That's kind of how I got involved in Cave Twitter and that kind of stuff is through him and knowing him and knowing his work. But yeah, it was an aggregate blog, and we had different people from different, theoretical point of views posting there. And then we had someone, Dirk, and who I think a lot of people in the internet world are familiar with. Dirk, always commenting on their blogs. I've never seen someone comment on so many different blogs before. Right. But he helped a lot in doing a lot of that aggregation, where he was really researching far and wide in the internet to find these topics and these projects that would be interesting under a general orbit of what we used to call post-nihilism, as a tongue-in-cheek term for people who are just discontented with all the available offerings and models and trying to start from some ground zero. But yeah, I mean, we've been doing it for many years, and I love the project. I need to post on it more. And yeah, thanks for plugging it.
Yeah, for sure. It's a good place. I mean, I'm a huge fan and booster of all like independent, autonomous, creative culture. And, it's not easy running a blog. Like even just it's easy to throw up a blog, but to like, to post on it and to write your own stuff and also to share other people's stuff and to do it like over the course of several years. And, it's hard to keep it going. And, so it's like, I think it's worth like celebrating, any little, any little mountain of neg entropy that autonomous creative intellectuals are able to build in the weird world of cyberspace. I think it's good. It's good to acknowledge, and it's good to celebrate, and it's good to like build linkages between people and to boost each other's stuff. Like I'm a big fan of that. So,
well, I like what you were saying at the top of the live stream. You're talking about how people are pulling away from mainstream media and looking at media such as yours and things like that, right? Because as a person who hasn't had cable in almost 2 decades because the mainstream media was driving me up the fucking wall. I really sympathize with that. I'd rather sit down and watch you talk to, Neuroshroud for 2 hours as opposed to like listen to some talking head on CNN that has no idea what they're necessarily talking about, and they haven't, and giving us a take that supports a whole massive set of projects that I just want nothing to do with.
Right. Yeah. So there's, I think, one final question if you're not in a rush to get off. And the question is, you brought this upon yourself, I believe, Michael. The question is, who might win between Nick Land and Jordan Peterson in a cage fight?
Oh, I was hoping someone would ask me that question. Because I have expertise in this area. I'm a MMA fighter and have been for many years. So,
oh wow,
cage fighting is of particular interest, and I would actually love to see that because I think both of those guys maybe need some of that. But I think Jordan Peterson would, because his reputation is more of a masculinist persona, and he would kind of make sure that he would have to come on top of that. And I don't think Nick would care that much about it all, unless he knows jiu-jitsu, because then he could have a really strong ground game. But besides that,
are you assuming both of them give their all in, a proper, like, let's say 6-week training camp, or are you assuming one would do that better than the other, or what? Training camp, that makes it, that's a big nuance. I don't know, because it depends on who has the resources and what kind of training camp they have and who their coaches are. But if I was to assume that they would give them all, I think Jordan Peterson would win. Yeah. But yeah, that's an interesting hypothesis. I feel like he might be tired from all of his book touring, Nick Land might be, conserving his energy, working on the Bitcoin book, and having a relaxed, healthy lifestyle, just waiting for the time that he might need to enter into some sort of cage fight. So I don't know. Jordan Peterson seems to be wearing himself down kind of thin. It's true, but that, his stamina might be better. And I think maybe there's only one way to find out, and that's raise the money that would be necessary to get them both to do it. I'm in. I will support that. All right, dude. Well, I think that's a great way to wrap it up. And this has been fun, man. I really appreciate it. It's good to know you somewhat personally now in a semi face-to-face kind of way, or at least voice-to-voice kind of way. Yeah, I really appreciate it. I follow your work, and I'm a big fan. So anytime I have a chance to chat with you, I'm down. Thanks, man. Yeah, we can do it again sometime for sure. I'm hoping to. I'm planning on. I think I feel fairly committed to pushing harder on this sort of stuff and these different platforms I'm kind of working on lately. I feel fairly committed to doing it at least quite a bit longer. I can't promise I'll do it forever, but I'm really into it, and it feels like it's worthwhile. And so I think I'm going to be doing this at least for some time. And so that means I'd always be happy to continue the conversation some other time if you ever want to. So yeah.
Likewise, one of the projects I do, and I'm not going to plug it too much, but I have a radio talk show on community radio here in
Oh, do you?
Alberta. Yeah, it's a literature and poetry focused talk show. But I'm thinking of changing it to talk about a little bit more of these issues and stuff, and kind of be more like a hard talk kind of format where we bring on interesting people and talk. So I will have you on my show as well and reciprocate.
Oh, dude, I'm always happy to do whatever with people I know that are fun to talk to. So for sure, let me know. I'm happy to help.
Yeah. All right.
All right, dude. Cool. This has been fun, man. Good to know you. Good to chat. Thanks thanks again. I appreciate it.
All right. Cheers.
All right, take it easy, Michael. All right, Space Explorer. Thank you for the kind words. I appreciate you too. That was fun. Thanks for hanging out, everybody. I think I won't stay on the line too much longer. I think I'm feeling a little tired, so no big post game rants from me. I'm trying to think if there's anything I wanted to share. No, I gave you some juicy deets about my life and what I'm thinking about before we started. Yeah, I'll have that blog post dropping soon, so look out for that. And yeah, the only thing I would say is what I always say at the end. If you haven't done so already, please do go ahead and subscribe. And if you want in the Discord, as I said, just shoot me an email or shoot me a DM, and I'll be more than happy to let you into the Discord server. I would say it's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool little community we got brewing. And I think tomorrow, actually, we're going to be doing a private voice hangout. So that'll be interesting. Yeah, if you're interested in that, DM or email me. And thanks for hanging out, as always. Some good questions in there today. And I'm still your favorite commie. Thanks, Finargle. I appreciate that. I am going on holiday in more than 1 week. So about not this Tuesday, but next Tuesday, I'm going to go on a little getaway for about a week. So I probably won't be doing stuff for that 1 week, but before and after that, I will be. After I get back from that, I'll be moving house. So that'll be a little bit chaotic, but maybe I'll live stream some of that. It might be interesting. Maybe some IRL live streams, moving house, or unrelated things. I'll show you. I'll have to give you a live stream tour of my new flat when I move into it. But yeah, as always, thank you very much. I'm grateful for you being here. And until next time, I wish you the best. Take it easy, everyone. And remember, whatever it is, just don't do it if I wouldn't do it. I wish you the best. Good night and good luck.